It is very interesting to ask, what does one get out of literature that you do not get out of nonfiction?
Okay, I think I'm plugged in. Do I sound any different?
You do. You sound richer.
Do
Yeah,
I?
try.
And I mean that monetarily.
Yes,
Yeah, it
yes.
sounds like you just made a lot of money.
Oh, good, good. That's what I'm going for.
Oh my
I want
God.
to trick
The
my
money,
bank
Oh,
account
baby.
the
balance.
money has poured in. I guess echo, or maybe it's high a little bit, Seth. I'm not 100%
Mm.
sure.
That might just
As
be
for
the ear damage that you have from your earring.
It probably is from the friggin' snowman.
Yeah.
Friggin' snowman. There's a way in which novels, if they're done correctly, are a kind of argument, actually. They're just not a linear algebraic argument. They're a kind of geometrical argument. Literature is the mathematics of the humanities, basically.
I love Flannery O'Connor. Reading a lot of literature can be like a violence, like it really pierces us, and the grace in that. I mean, for me, that is part of why I'm so willing to go into the shadowy places and be confronted by things there, because of that. Yeah.
Unfortunately, at this point, I think most people, they say, what's the point? I don't see why to do those things. So I would say our work now, as the first step, is to move from looking at literature and saying, I don't see the point, to instead saying, man, I wish I had time to. Because if that shift can occur, then I think we've gone a long way.
Doors close swiftly. The man moth always seats himself facing the wrong way. If you catch him, hold up a flashlight to his eye. It's all dark pupil, an entire night itself, whose haired horizon tightens. Then from the lids, one tear, his only possession, like the bee's sting, slips. However, if you watch, he'll hand it over, cool as from underground springs and pure enough to drink.
Wow.
It's a story about a bull and a character trying to get him in the field. It has nothing to do with theology, and every single scene had everything to do with this theological question and the stakes of the modern world, right?
But that happens for me, and I know for many other therapists, that happens through the body. And all of this is what leads to interpretation. And it is like reading really good fiction. It is.
Like with your intimate partner or something in a special moment, what do you say? Well, you pause a little longer and you begin to speak a little more poetically, or you reach for metaphors because you're actually trying to resonate something that you can't quite put into words.
When I was super, super young, I would pull these books out of this bookshelf we had. I didn't even know what 90% of the words meant, but I loved just reading it. It's just such a strange thing. And even now when I read poetry, sometimes I'm almost sort of like humming as I read it. There's all this other stuff going on.
What's that, my dear?
Well, can you finish the sentence somewhat succinctly? Probably not.
We can't defend.
Probably not.
You can't defend attention unless you have a robust defense of fiction.
We are soon going to turn actually into a comedy channel.
It's
You know.
gonna be the return of Seinfeld.
It's funny. I had the little thought in my head. Oh, do we need to mention the phrase authentic resonance? Because that's what we are always talking about, is authentic resonance.
This is all that she drew.
Oh, Grace's favorite animal is axolotl. Grace
Well, there
will
you
be
go. Those
thrilled.
two would get along very well.
Yeah, sure. The algorithm's killing my attention, but I'm entertained, aren't I?
Your snowman's backwards, Daniel.
I know,
I
it's
know,
really
but
hard
it
to get it
adds to
straight.
it.
Kind of adds, you're kind of wanting to know.
There's a
what it looks
mystery.
like.
What is it
Yeah.
exactly? And then at the
Yeah.
end, it turns around. Yeah.
It's frosty.
I've got Edgar Allan Poe sitting back here. That's who
Oh,
that
well, that's what Christmas is all about.
Yeah, with a
of
little hat
course.
on. Yeah.
Quote the Raven, nevermore.
Well,
I
he had
am-
a raven on his shoulder that was detachable with Velcro, a little one. It was my favorite
Perfect.
part. Have you been in the manger?
Oh, he's
Have I
helping
been in the
Mary
manger?
give birth.
No,
Oh,
no,
yeah.
no.
Thank you for helping bring Jesus into the world. That's important. I heard that mattered. I read
Especially
that
for an
somewhere.
atheist.
Yeah, wow. Really, really humble of you. It's really that. Now that is global pluralism.
I have all these scandalous things about how, like Mary and
Bring the scandal.
what, they're really an immaculate conception.
We're going to
Yeah,
answer all those
yeah.
questions today. That's what we're going to do.
Yeah, that's today, actually. I'm so glad you brought that up because Nicaea has nothing on us. So that really, really works out.
No,
Hope
you've
you
got
guys are good.
Aspasia. You don't need Nicaea. Yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
Well,
I was like, wow, you girls, you make it happen.
the stuff
You
we
know,
do, I tell you.
it's stuff you do. So
Yeah.
well done. Everyone put an ornament around your ear and you'll appreciate women wearing earrings all the time. So,
Seth looks like he wants to get the hell out of here already.
he's like, okay, well, authentic resonance says I'm sick. I just got ill.
Sorry, guys.
How's this?
Oh, you can ring. It can be the Barb Marley. That's when Barb Marley comes and saves
Christmas spirit,
Scrooge.
here we are. Look at that. And look at that joyous smile.
Oh my goodness, Scrooge is saved. My eye isn't functioning. I'm going to try to persevere with this heavy ornament on my ear in the name of the spirit of Christmas. This ornament hurts so bad. Oh, it hurts.
Lovely people. Are there things on your mind that you want to speak about today? Because I had a couple, but I don't want to.
I'm reading 4 different books at the same time, but if I would have only been reading one of them, it'd probably be easier for me to talk about it. I'm curious, do either of you know this book though? Have you seen this before?
Well,
nope, not familiar.
It's not the Camus Outsider, is it? No.
No, but actually
Right.
Camus is mentioned. So
I love The Outsider by Camus, one of my all-time favorite books.
It takes the form of a literary history. I heard Zach Stein recommend the book at one point, but it's basically The Outsider is what you think. It's the outsider in society. But the way the book is written, he basically goes through many different characters and many different, writings who were outsiders. Like one of the phrases early on is, he saw too deeply and he saw too much. And some of these characters are nihilistic, but I think as the book progresses, there is a romantic outsider and there's the artistic outsider, but it's sort of like just all these different versions of outsiders. But it goes together with another thing, which I would have to credit Daniel, also Michelle, for kind of softly nudging me over time, because I have probably not read a fiction book for over a decade. Mm-hmm. And I just, because I don't know, I'm trying to, get more chops in my work. So I need to read this book on how the brain works, or I need to read that self-helpy book, or I need to read that psychology book or the somatics book. And it's like, what about reading
real knowledge? Yeah.
Yeah, real knowledge, not this fiction stuff. But my daughter, I said, what do you want for Christmas? And I get a list, and she had a book on there. And so I'd never heard of it. And I ordered the book, and it came, and I was like, wow, this looks tremendous. And I started reading it. It's a new author. Would have to
there
find
goes that Christmas surprise. And also Seth has kept it for himself.
He does not mind guessing. It's Hanya Yanagihara.
Oh.
Have you heard of this?
I think yes. A Little Life. Someone told me.
So far, it's just incredible. And again, I'm early on in the book, so I'm just admiring the writing. But there's this beautiful scene. Basically, there's these 4 friends that I think it tracks probably their whole or decades of their life, and I'm early. But there's this one little paragraph where, or a couple paragraphs where one of the 4, his younger brother, doesn't. I don't recall, has some severe handicap basically all his life. And the parents have lost several children before this son. And then the main character's healthy, but as he grows up, he sort of takes care of his brother because, anyway, he goes off to college and goes off to New York where the book is unfolding. But, the brother who's handicapped has problems and eventually goes home, and he wants to care for his brother, and the parents are kind of indifferent. So at one point, the parents are like, don't even come, don't even bother. So there's also an issue of money, like he's got to travel there. So one of the other 4 friends who has money gives him the money, and he says, I'll pay you back. And the friend says, I don't really care. Just take it, just go. So he goes, and then he comes back, and he wants to pay the guy back, but he knows that he's going to refuse to be paid back. So one of the third friends says, just every once in a while, put a little cash in his wallet. He won't know. And so he does this. And then at the end of the paragraph, it just says, the guy who lent the money in the first place, well, he just ended up spending on his friends anyway. But, the guy paid him back, felt good about it. So there's so much just in this one paragraph, it sort of, shows this care that's moving around and how they do it and all the complexities of it. And I'm mangling it as I'm trying to paraphrase a passage of the book. But yeah, it's just really, it's a different experience to be just sort of following this, beautiful story, which I don't know where it's going. I've read the back of the book with the summary of, themes, but and it's absolutely turning gears that are not the gears that are turned when I listen to a podcast or, read some of the other books that I tend to read. So
Love it.
I'll just leave that there.
Yeah, no, I'll be buying that. I always end up with a little list of things. Look, the only thing I've been reading, I'll just say briefly, that everyone must purchase for Christmas presents is this. This is the only thing I've been reading.
You're fantastic.
You're
That
on
is
my plate.
fantastic. Thank you, Aspasia.
Had that there. That's great. Yeah, I think actually the stuff I was going to bring up kind of links to that anyway. I've just been thinking lots more, especially on the back of our last conversation about that phrase, the rigor of mystery, and just thinking about, because also Seth, I was saying something last time and you did kind of jump in and say that is exactly what we need more rigor around, those sorts of words. Like I was saying things like awe and sacred and mystery and wonder and all these things. And then that also, yeah, obviously connected that I've been thinking about that phrase a bit more. And I was listening back to a little bit to that first conversation we had, Daniel, you and I, almost 2 years ago now. Can't believe it.
That's crazy. That's crazy.
Which was the rigor of mystery. And what I picked up on in that conversation was at the time we spoke about, because you had been speaking about with lots of other people online and it had been a topic, themos and like the thematic. And I'm always, sometimes when I listen back to these older conversations, not just ours, but other people's, I'm always curious about like what happens to that idea for someone. Like, that was kind of the thing that everyone was talking about. And then like, how do you understand it now? And how you would kind of bring that into what we're exploring. Because a lot of what I was hearing there really does sound like it's not the life force, but it's like the liveliness of a person, the kind of amount of aliveness or something inside a person. And obviously that does relate to authentic resonance. I don't know, for whatever reason, I have this feeling inside that might be something really interesting for the three of us to bring in. I think something about that's really interesting, because when I think about the rigor of mystery, I also think about obviously this divide, very rough, crude divide between kind of types of people, and which I think Seth was talking about last time too, or the time before, of kind of, the people who maybe we say are more intuitively minded or are more willing to sort of like appreciate intuition, or then the people that like things to be very kind of measurable and scientific. And again, very crude separation there. But how it is that we can bring some of these ideas, I guess, to people that are so resistant towards the idea of something like the rigor of mystery. So I hope, sorry, I know that really is a dog's breakfast. I hope there's something in there that makes sense. That's what I've been thinking about. I've also been thinking about a few other things that I actually wrote notes about this time. I really liked at the last net what Thomas said around like humans as an egg. Like this is sort of the idea of like they're resilient to vertical pressure, but crushed by horizontal force. I thought that was really, really cool. I don't know why that seemed to, I think that maybe that links to things that we have been talking about, sort of like sublation and like geometry. So I thought I'd throw that in there. And I'm really interested in market forces. So there you go. Because that ties neatly. So I'm just going to throw those things there. Anything that stands out.
No, I think all that's fantastic. It is very interesting to ask what exactly, and I actually think it's related a bit to what Aspasia was talking about, on this idea of what does one get out of literature that you do not get out of nonfiction, right? Well, the first thing, just as a quick thing, is if I say to you, people have friends, when friends help one another, it always kind of comes back around, right? Like, friends are always going to basically return the favor. Well, it's one thing for me to say that, and another thing for me to show it in the way that you sneak the money into the pocket, right? That you kind of put it back in. Now, What's interesting about that is the reason why it can be very important to show different ways that an explicit idea can actually manifest is because if you never see different ways, like friends pay friends back, we all tend to get locked in our ideas of what that looks like and how people do that. And if you don't see different ways that people do that, it may never occur to you the different love languages, as like Gary Chapman may have. And actually, you would never therefore develop the ability to see empathy, like to see the different ways that people act and express themselves in the world, because great novels show ways that people enact love, not just speak love. Like nonfiction will say something like people have different ways of showing love. Okay, well, I know that, but if I don't have the ability to recognize different expressions of love, that explicit knowledge is actually not very useful, right? Novels can show you because there's a difference between knowing and recognizing, right? You could actually argue what can happen is if your diet is too heavy in nonfiction, then you gain a lot of knowledge, but not the ability to recognize the enactment of that knowledge or the different manifestations of it. And in that way, the knowledge may actually simply serve your worldview or your map, et cetera, so forth, right? So literature has a way of teaching you how to follow the idea manifesting, following how it comes out, and how different people have, how a bunch of, like in Chekhov, how a bunch of characters who love one another because they love one another are constantly misunderstanding one another or constantly hurting one another precisely in their efforts not to hurt one another, like to the hedgehog dilemma. The more the hedgehogs love one another, the more they hurt one another, right? It's one thing for me to, in terms of nonfiction, talk about the hedgehog dilemma, an entirely another thing to show people caught up in the hedgehog dilemma. And like great short stories of O. Henry or something. So also on this idea of where do ideas go, like themos. So generally the notion of themos as kind of themos, yeah, I got to say it right? This sort of liveliness, the tripartite soul in Plato, eros, logos, themos. And basically you have to have all three, or the soul is not well managed and you tend to get pathology. So if you have desire and logic, but not themos, you can get maybe the hunchback that Nietzsche talks about, or the machine, the algorithm. If you have themos and eros, but not logos, then you'll probably have a barbarian, right? So the thematic has a certain liveliness. And you could argue that we today, and Francis Fukuyama would say this is very intentional, we have a society that lacks themos because it can turn into war and violence. And the idea is, the hope was that market forces and that market competition would actually address the thymotic, because you could climb the ladder, get status, and you'd feel like a warrior and you would accomplish things, right? And it does not seem to be the case that the market is able to thymotically address people, as we're seeing in this emergence of popularism, Fuentes, post-liberal, all these different things are coming back, right? Now, there is a very interesting question, actually. Where do ideas go? Like, if you stop talking about this the most, why does a term stop appearing in a conversation? Like, for example, there were times where I talk all the time about absolute knower, or Nietzschean child, or intrinsic motivation, right? Or, there's a way in which there are certain flip moments. I can go on. There are a way in which terms kind of appear, but then they kind of go away. Why is that? Well, I think in some respects, what ends up happening is terms fold into terms that then people kind of orbit around certain terms relative to what seems fitting for the moment, that they believe includes, via sublation, what came before adequately, right? So now, like if Jock and I are talking about beauty, well, one of the keys of the strike of beauty is there actually is something thymotic about it, because you must change your life. It has a certain stab. It's not just passive beauty. It has a certain shock to it, right? And beauty, critically, the strike of beauty is erotic because of desire, right? So it's thymotic, erotic. But then the beauty, the key is beauty. The threat to beauty is the logos, because you want to make it comprehensible, but that reduces it to the vector of the good. So there's also this idea that there's a lot of challenge now for the logos and philosophy to actually think of itself as very intentionally encountering its own limit and accepting that limitation. So what ends up happening is you can begin just talking about the strike of beauty, because the way that you've defined the strike of beauty would actually address the thymotic, that in talking about the beauty. So it almost becomes holographic, right? It's like including all those different things. And one of the reasons also you may make a point in conversations to talk about the thymotic is because there are other people online in language games who are making very good points who use that language, right? And so there's also a certain effort where you're reaching out and you're saying this actually is what they're talking about matters. They're correct that that thymos matters. And it becomes a way to kind of sublate it and bridge it in to the conversation you're having, right? Because you're trying, because if you're, if you're looking for truth, if you will, then it doesn't matter who says it. If it's relevant, it's what you want to bring in and bring into the discussion, right? So I think also there's a way in which it's almost good. There's terms you use and they disappear because that could be sublation. The alternative are these language games where people insist everyone uses their terms, and if you don't, you're wrong, and it becomes a kind of mess. And you see it with academics all the time, right? Where it's like, these are my terms and we're going to use them forever because you have a kind of egoic sort of investment in it. That's not good. So the alternative is to figure out a way how to use terms and then work the conversation. I think also what ends up happening is because the prime thing is the conversation more than the terms. And all of those terms are kind of melded into the conversation, which is continual, and you're following the development. You're following the unfolding. I actually think the ability to follow the unfolding is something that literature teaches, that actually novels do teach. And I think great philosophy and great theology do the same. They teach you how to, some people would say, follow an argument, right? There's a way in which novels, if they're done correctly, are a kind of argument, actually. They're just not a linear algebraic argument. They're a kind of geometrical argument, actually. There's a paper we have in Reconstructing ANA that basically says, literature is the mathematics of the humanities, basically. It is actually the proof of, literature is what a mathematical, how there are proofs in mathematics? There's a way in which literature functions as proofs of theological and philosophical positions. Yeah. Because if I cannot render into a story a philosophical idea, that idea is probably false or not useful or not valuable, right? Now, you get into the question of what is a good story, etc., of course, but there is something about story that is the proof of idea. If it cannot be enstoried, then it's probably just an abstraction that can't be made in concrete and therefore is probably just problematic philosophy, academic stuff, right? So story is a kind of proof. Story trains unfolding. Please.
Sorry, can I just, because it requires plausibility too, is that what you mean? Like sort of, it's like you can't just write anything, right? Like for it to be
correct.
Yeah, I understand.
Right. Because great fiction is not, the tricky thing with fiction is it seems like the author could do anything, but when you read the biographies, it's this weird, yes, they can do anything, but they also can't. Right? Now, the great Andrew Luber and Alex have written a book that's not released yet, so we're going to mention it here to pressure them, on story and theme that actually gives a very beautiful account of how this actually works. I think it's the best out there. And what exactly is a story? Because there's an argument to be made that we almost don't know what a story is, as weird as that sounds. But they actually have written a book on that topic. And I think it's very, very important. And they had a lovely chat at the Meaning Code with Karen on this that I would suggest to people. And of course, we've spoken with Andrew and Alex like numerous times. Anyway, the notion is that story trains the ability to follow an argument. And actually, I would argue it's very problematic if people actually think the following of an argument is most of the nonfiction books that are put out today. And I think this is because like Atomic Habits or a lot of the top nonfiction books, I'm not saying they're bad books, but usually you don't have to follow the argument. The argument is presented to you very clearly, then case studies, then usually a wrinkle, case studies, conclusion, right? Now, that is an argument, and you do have to in one way follow it, but dare I say, kind of the arguments that you really, really need to learn how to follow are going to be the ones of literature, which it's not even obvious what the argument is. You have to pay attention. You have to see how it develops and unfolds. And this also, I think, trains a muscle that is needed for us not to get sucked into attentionalism and dopamine and the algorithm, that very muscle that literature can actually train. And ironically, in this weird way, it can seem as if fiction is not really learning anything, whereas nonfiction books are, because, well, one of the things that fiction is actually training you is attention, right? Attention, the ability to attend. And the problem is, since you're always seeing through attention, it's easy not to look at attention itself as a value, therefore not think, and therefore conclude that literature isn't actually teaching you anything, whereas the nonfiction books are. But actually, literature is training that very muscle of your ability to attend. I would also say on this question of getting these ideas to the public, I'm a big fan of talking about art now, because art is where you emotionally impact people. And then in that emotional impact, if the stories entail the ideas, the very emotional impact makes the ideas plausible and it makes them seem relevant, right? So the relation of story and philosophy, just to say it very generally, is one that Michelle and I think a lot of. We think it's a very important relation. And then if you want to bring in market forces, unfortunately, market forces tend to be against the large novel, the Brothers Karamazov, A Little Life. These are not books that are easily published. These are ones that are difficult to make space for in the market. And that also could mean the market forces, although that means many things, but there is a danger where that's another way that market forces lead us to losing attention, not being able to focus, is in the way that it also moves us away from novels, maybe more towards cinema and movies, well, more toward Netflix and different things. Because there's always that idea, why read the book when I can watch the movie? That's another thing you hear people say. I recently heard Glenn and Cale and Anne Crawford, they were having a discussion, and I really like what Cale said. He said that the relation of watching a movie, and I'll stop and pass, these are just opening thoughts. And the egg thing that Jochen said actually is fantastic. And I would actually perhaps argue that the vertical dimension of the egg is attention, and that's the muscle that literature is training. And if you don't have that, you get crushed from the side quite easily. Because the vertical and attention always go together, even in like theology and Kierkegaard and different things. But what they were saying, and I really like what Cale said, is that in the same way that there's a difference between consuming music and making music, there's a difference between watching a movie and reading a book. And the point that he was actually making is that reading a book is like making music, because your brain is active. It has to make the image. You have to be paying attention. Whereas watching the movie is more like consuming music. And I thought it was quite a brilliant point, is that reading the obvious example that everyone loves, reading The Lord of the Rings is like making music, whereas watching The Lord of the Rings is like consuming music. Now, of course, once you've read the book and then watch the movie, watching the movie can be wonderful because it brings back the book and you're kind of remembering your experience of reading it. The question is replacing books with movies. That's the equivalent of replacing the making of music with the consuming of music. And I think we've seen, it's not like people after dinner are playing banjo anymore and singing. They're not doing carols. There's a social price if you lose the ability to make music and only consume music. The way people hang out and what they do is going to be it's going to be moving away from the hot mediums to the cold mediums, as McLuhan said. For him, a hot medium is a book because it's very mentally active, where TV is cold because it's more passive. Right? So gradually society has moved from hot mediums to cold mediums, meaning you can be more passive. Well, that means you don't train attention. That means you can't follow the unfolding of arguments. And if at the end of the day, one's capacity for authentic resonance upon which the unfolding of their life hinges is also tied to one's ability to dwell in and follow unfolding, then the loss of literature would actually have bearing on this as well. So those are just some opening thoughts. And the topic of outsiders is interesting as well. But I'll stop there.
Can I have one quick point, and then I'm happy to pass it on. I loved all of that. I also think a lot too about how story, like if you're comparing it to, like a nonfiction book like Atomic Habits, right? Something like that. There's a very clear way with something that is nonfiction where I think the reader is likely to end up at the end with something that is quite similar across the board and is what the author intended and all of these things. Whereas with story, I always think about it as like a really good one anyway. It really depends on the position of the reader in that moment as to what most unfolds for them in that adventure as well, like, and what it is, like I guess the theme that they take away from it, or and that's what I love about a really good story, is that that experience that we all have of being able to read, you know, your favorite books over and over and over again. And there's always something new in it. And the experience of it, there's always things that I see anew, or that never, stood out in that way the last time I read it. Whereas, and that's not to say that doesn't happen with nonfiction, sure, but it's much more of a dry kind of experience of that. I think there is something, it reminds me again of like The Prism or something. There's just something about a really well-crafted story that you can just experience it and re-experience it over and over, and the thing that the reader is left with at the end and the experience that they had while reading it is going to differ so widely, as opposed to, I think, something more like a nonfiction. It's not to say there's not difference, but and I think if you're doing that over and over again, you're reading fiction over and over again, you're really facilitating this kind of relationship to yourself, which is, I think, what we've already discussed. The sort of trust almost too in that part of yourself that unfolds, and that surprise, and that being able to be struck in a manner and left with something that you wouldn't have been able to predict. And it simultaneously has something to do with, at least for me, like I'm thinking about when I read and I'm really absorbed in it. There is still, like I'm absorbed in it, so there is kind of like a forgetting of yourself, right? But there is also that thing of the experience I'm having, if I really look at it, is also related to what is happening for me in my life currently. Like there is still that relationship, like the things that are standing out. So there is still some level of, I think there is still some level of comparison to where I am in this moment, without it feeling that way. I don't know, and it's mysterious and it's wonderful, and it's reminding me it's something I need to be doing more often. Seth, over to you. Yeah.
Yeah, well, as I listen, I just keep kind of kicking myself for not reading fiction the last decade. But yeah, like even the nonfiction book that has an argument and it has a series of case studies, it's like, well, what about the case study that's not in the book? So. And I think the author of the nonfiction, especially if the case studies are drawn from their life, they're doing something valuable there. But I think there's a sort of you're more in an acquisition mindset when you're reading nonfiction. Like I have my pen out, I'm highlighting and putting asterisks. I don't mark up the fiction book while I read it. I mean, I don't know, maybe if I start reading more fiction, I'll start doing that. But the little passage I mentioned about the friends paying each other back in secret, and that might not be the paragraph that stuck out for someone else, but I was touched by that, and I'm having a relationship to the characters, which is very different again than like I'm underlining the important passages that I can apply to get myself out of my stuck situation. It's just I'm in an entirely different mode. There's a feeling of as I mentioned, I have 4 books to choose from every time I decide to read. But when I really want to enjoy myself, that's when I pick up the fiction book. And it's probably a different, I don't know, people who measure brain waves would probably get something different out of my brain when I'm reading, a little life versus the other pieces. And I really appreciate this thing you're saying, Daniel, about how it trains the attention. And because like often I've spoken about working with clients and Aspasia as well, but like before the client shows up in the room, all you have is certain principles of how I work with people, right? But then the person who shows up, it might even ping you, oh, I know what principle to draw upon, but you still don't know how it's going to show up in this person. And the attention it's not so much that, oh, I selected the correct category of how to apply a strategy to a client or something like that. It's like, no, who is this person? Actually, one of the things I was just listening to was a conversation, you were part of Aspasia, on the adjacent possible. And you were talking about countertransference, which, as I understood it, because I don't use this terminology all the time, but it's basically like what's happening in your body while you're listening to your client. Is that right?
It is. And
Yes.
it's also the part of what's happening in my body that we would assign to a reaction to what is happening in the transference. So it's like a reaction. So it's kind of like actually theirs that happens through me. It's kind of, because there's other things. There's also just your natural reaction to what's happening to a person. So there is kind of a distinction. But yes, essentially it's what's happening in my body in response to.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the discussion was also about AI, and obviously we have this idea that AI can do therapy, but it doesn't have a body. It doesn't experience emotion. So basically, all it can do is pull out, protocols and it can analyze your prompt and analyze the story you're telling it, but it's not gonna feel slightly angry because the thing you said sounded kind of like what the AI's mother used to say to it when, so it's like,
Go. I was just going to say, it's not going to have, so like, actually, you can continue. I'll jump in later if it's relevant. Go.
Let's argue about it.
Yeah, let's let's get the AI involved.
Well, I mean, I don't feel too precious about what I'm saying because I'm kind of feeling like a beginner. I haven't read fiction for so long, and I'm just really kind of, I mean, what's nice is like, I imagine people listening like going, what, this guy didn't know this, like, but okay, but it allows me to be in the state of wonder, the sort of beginner's mind, right? Which is something really valuable. That's something that I learned because there was a point in time where I just hated to be in any conversation where I didn't have the background knowledge. And I discovered if you can ask a good question, or you can sort of say something that seems too obvious for anyone else to say, it can actually be a really, generative thing to do. But anyway, I don't feel like I'm spouting deep insights right now. I'm just sort of
I think this is wonderful. Good, Daniel.
Okay,
Very, very
good.
Yeah.
My ears.
Well, no, but
Very few people read fiction now. And I actually think it's for many reasons like you're suggesting, like what's the point? Why? Couldn't I be reading something that was more productive or something, right? And I do think the loss of fiction is very significant. So there's a few things. So first you mentioned interpretation. There's a question of how do you interpret well? Because it's one thing for me to say all we have is interpretation, and it's another thing for me to say how do you learn how to get good at interpretation, actually. That requires fiction. It's also very interesting. I would argue that modern nonfiction books, because it's very interesting, is not Kant's third critique nonfiction, right? Is not, Tocqueville's Democracy nonfiction. I mean, that's not a crazy philosophy book like Phenomenology of Spirit. And yet it seems odd. Doesn't it feel odd to say that Tocqueville's Democracy is nonfiction like Atomic Habits? They seem to have nothing to do with one another, right? To say something very general, the point of a book like Atomic Habits, which by the way has benefited many people, so it's no slash on the book or anything, but we're talking about the structure. The whole point of a book like Atomic Habits is that you don't interpret it. You don't interpret it. You're convinced, right? You may object. Now, please note, if you object to something like Atomic Habits or many of the nonfiction books, you go and do research. It's not actually a matter of interpretation. It's a matter of we'll go get counter research or say, well, this only applies to, what did they call it? The weirds, like white, that whole idea that most of these psychology studies only apply to like North America or whatever. There's all of those kind of studies to show. But that's not actually an argument of interpretation. That's an argument of research. That is an objection. Whereas when you think about something like Tocqueville's Democracy, what research are you going to do? It's actually in the realm of interpretation. How do you interpret Tocqueville's Democracy or something like even Class of Civilizations by Huntington or something, right? So there's also this interesting idea that there seems to have been a loss of I almost want to say the ambitious nonfiction, or kind of these ambitious journals or these kind of works that even if they're nonfiction, nevertheless demanded the attention that literature demanded. Like Tocqueville's Democracy demands the attention that literature demands as well, right? So it's very interesting that it's not really fiction versus nonfiction as such. It's almost as if modern nonfiction is doing something that is particularly atrocious, or problematic, if not noticed, right? And I think what it is doing is basically removing interpretation. Now, of course, you would say, but isn't that a good thing? Because interpretation keeps us from truth, right? Interpretation is the big enemy. And what we want to do is remove interpretation. No, interpretation is unavoidable. And in fact, interpretation is, here's the key, human. Like, all humans ever do is interpret in human situations. Your wife, your spouse, your friends, all you're ever doing is interpreting, and you never get certainty. You only perhaps get confidence, right? So the skill of interpretation is, in a sense, the human way of knowing, whereas programming is how the machine knows, right? So like objections, research, that's all algorithm, that's all machine, right? Interpretation is precisely also the possibility of romance and love. Like, if there's no interpretation, there's no relationship. Like, what is a relationship but the work of interpretation? Like, working interpretation toward intimacy, right? So interpretation and intimacy go together, and relationships go together, right? So part of the problem with the loss of, dare I say, the kind of these ambitious nonfiction works and the loss of literature, and notably literature, because of course literature, they're both, Tocqueville's democracy requires interpretation, but obviously Brothers Karamazov requires more interpretation, right? What's super bad is you could say that now all people read are books that have no level. They're trying to remove all interpretation, as opposed to say, yeah, we're always interpreting, but we're going to gradually work to where we can do more advanced and difficult works of interpretation. The loss of poetry, no one reads poetry really. And that's also a major issue, because that's also on this gradient of interpretation train. I mean, there's an argument to be made that unless you're learning how to interpret well, you're not actually getting an education. Like, you've actually not received an education unless you've learned how to interpret well. We now think education is learning how to do research. And of course, research is important. Gathering data is important. But the education on the side of being human, or of the humanities, is all tied to the question of interpretation. And actually, we've kind of thrown out the humanities in favor of STEM, basically kind of saying like, well, the humanities are just interpretation, so that's not as important as the STEM because it's less concrete. When in fact, the whole reason the humanities matter is because they're all about the work of interpretation and getting better at it. And how do you have conversations about first principles? We're now actually facing the consequences. Politically, we see quite clearly what happens in a world where people are not educated to interpret well, or to even know what it is. Because interpretation, also critically, if we ask what is interpretation, there's a way in which the problem of the metaphor of interpretation is it sounds like you're deciphering a code, that there's a code that you're deciphering, right? I really don't think this metaphor of interpretation is good at all. Interpretation is more of the ability to follow the unfolding. It is the ability to pay attention and to see the multidimensionality of phenomenon, right? Like, interpretation as a word is almost useless now, because it does, in people's mind, they also have a very mistaken notion of what a literature, they think literature is a puzzle you're supposed to get the symbols and the meaning into code. So they think that like it's a Kantian, people's understanding of literature is Kantian. There's a noumenon and we're supposed to get across it and decode it. No. You need the sacramental ontology. Like, literature is, a rock has a fundamental, like Flannery O'Connor says, like, rocks have meaning. Your job as the writer is to describe a rock well, not to make it a symbol, because rocks are meaningful. So just describe it and the meaning will come through, as opposed to be in the business of making it a symbol. Bad writers make symbols, because reality is fundamentally, in its very essence, meaningful. And
this happens through the body. It happens through the body. Yes. This is it. Yeah.
And so the problem as well with the topic of interpretation is that we have a understanding of literature as codes we're cracking. Like, there's a hidden meaning we're trying to crack. There's a noumenon we're trying to cross. And interpretation is the decoding of that. And then the idea is, well, that skill of decoding texts. Decoding is a word that's killed literature. We're like, the skill of decoding texts is nifty, but it's not going to give me a job, and I don't see what the benefit is. Okay? This has been a disaster because interpretation is not about decoding, it's about attention, learning attention. And you see the reason why attention only works, though, if you're able to not just pay attention to the phenomenon in front of you, but the constellation of ideas around it and the metaphysical dimensions of what it is and its history. You don't pay attention to something by just being an empiricist. You pay attention to something by holding the sum of its entire being in mind as it unfolds through time. And that's what literature teaches you.
Yeah.
When you think about that retrospectively, it seems like decoding and cracking the code, but it's actually, interpretation is more like a holding than it is a decoding. And if you're not able to hold, you're not going to be able to hold together friendships or relationships or businesses or political bodies because you're trying to decode the secret meaning. So everyone then turns into a conspiracist. Everyone is basically looking for the secret that is behind everything, as opposing to learn how to attend to what's in front of them in a manner that it shines forth in its fullness. So the first, I have three more. I'll stop here. There's more to be said on what fiction teaches. The first thing I just want to say is it is difficult for people to get this because we think that books are codes we're trying to decode. We think that interpretation is a decoding thing, and we think interpretation keeps you from the truth. Therefore, fiction is stupid, basically. It does nothing for you. But if you understand interpretation is not decoding, it's about holding multidimensionality and to see the ability to see more than one thing at the same time in the same thing. And that's something I'll elaborate on because that's really important. Then we can start to say, oh, what fiction is actually teaching is the ability to be human with one another. That's pretty important. I'll stop there.
That's psychodynamic therapy too, right? Like when you're talking about interpretation too, that is essentially, and that links to what you brought in there, Seth, too, from the adjacent possible conversation about countertransference and the body. And the point I was trying to get across about AI is interpretation is one of the most important parts of what eventually happens, right? But it's the same thing. Like people are learning and they're like, how do you do that bit? Like, teach me as though, and again, some people can experience it like, like you decoded it, but it's not. It's always contextual, and it's always relational, and it's holding about 2,000 pieces in mind all the time and understanding across time in this relationship how they have played out, and always without blinders on, always keeping pieces open. But that happens for me, and I know for many other therapists, that happens through the body. And so much about what countertransference is you're not, I think it's just another version of exactly what you're saying, Daniel, but I guess in a different illustration. We're not, I mean, there is a part of me that's in my head very consciously kind of going through some version of logic and things. But that's not where this comes from. This is like paying attention to everything that occurs inside me and everything that's going on in the relationship, and the weird, like these weird kind of sensations and feelings that come over you as the therapist when you're working with someone and trying to make sense of them and understanding them within the context. And all of this is what leads to interpretation. And it is like reading really good fiction. It is. You're exactly right. It's the same kind of experience because lots of things are happening and pinging inside you, or whatever you want to call it. But it's not clear. There's no manual that tells you which one to pay attention to and what that one means and what this is, because it's ever changing, it's ever shifting based on who you're with that moment, the history, all these things. So I really appreciated the way, you laid that out, Daniel. I think that's exactly right. But I do think what you're saying about nonfiction, current nonfiction, Daniel, being very like a different kind of thing again, it's like spot on. I thought that was really, really astute, because it is, you're right. And I used to, when I was young, I used to love reading nonfiction. I think even in the span of that time, it seems to have changed, because that kind of nonfiction was very different. And it was like things more like, I guess, like the history of ideas, or like, and like people are still taking you through kind of a story and a journey, and they're like, doing, whereas now, yeah, it's like, here's a book, it's like almost like a textbook, but it's a textbook. And it's got a very narrow focus. I think that's part of it. There's something very, very, very narrow about it. And like, this is what the person's going to take away. And I do understand why, but there is also a lot of sort of dumbing down the language too, I think, and things to ensure that it's reachable to a broader audience. You know, like often the encouragement of talking about things in very simple terms, which I understand. If you have a really, you know, important idea, you want to be, you think it's going to help people. But I think all of that taken together has changed, yeah, maybe what kind of like current day nonfiction looks like and feels like to read. And you're right, I guess, like, yeah, the prioritization of that in society at large as these are the better books to read because afterwards you'll know something better about how to run your life and you'll be smarter and wiser and also like, yeah, there is just a real push for that at the moment. Self-help and sort of like coaching yourself and all these things. And that the alternative fiction is kind of more of a like fanciful, bit of a waste of time. Might as well watch a TV show. It's very sad, isn't it? It's very sad. Because there's really nothing at all that is similar about reading a book versus watching a TV show. And I will just never forget when I used to read fiction the most, which was when I was younger. I will just never forget that, like the imagery that populated my head and kind of like the enjoyment of noticing that I was able to do that. Like you're reading and yet you're seeing, and there was so much enjoyment about that I knew that it was I was sort of generating it, and it was, I don't know. There's something about that was much more absorbing than, yeah, that's that passive receivership of kind of, oh, they've chosen those characters, they're on those actors, and okay, like, yeah, which still has its place. But yeah, all of that was just incredibly important. But this thing about taking seriously everything that is happening in the body and in the relationship, and that weird space in between the relationship, and like all that stuff, and then how we interpret that together is just so key, because that is the shadowy land where there is no black and white rules and there are no. Anyway,
Good.
I'll leave it there. I've said enough. I've been talking enough.
Okay, well, as an experiment, I want to read a passage from the book.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'd love to just get your responses, but in so much as like we'll move out of podcast mode into storytelling for a moment.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was flipping through the book, and it's the start of the chapter, so I was able to sort of recognize something I've read. And I mean, this to me has so much in it, but the other thing I want to just throw in a phrase that I often use is like, for me, the musicality of being is here, because just the language, how it's written. But anyway, here's a little reading for you. So it's from A Little Life. At 5 p.m. every weekday and at 11 a.m. every weekend, JB got on the subway and headed for his studio in Long Island City. The weekday journey was his favorite. He'd board at Canal and watch the train fill and empty at each stop, with an ever-shifting mix of different peoples and ethnicities. The car's population reconstituting itself every 10 blocks or so into provocative and improbable constellations of Poles, Chinese, Koreans, Senegalese, Dominicans, Indians, Pakistanis, Irish, Salvadorans, Mexicans, Sri Lankans, Nigerians, and Tibetans. The only thing uniting them being their newness to America and their identical expressions of exhaustion, that blend of determination and resignation that only the immigrant possesses. In these moments, he was both grateful for his own luck and sentimental about his city, neither of which he felt very often. He was not someone who celebrated his hometown as a glorious mosaic, and he made fun of people who did. But he admired, how could you not, the collective amount of labor, real labor, that his trainmates had no doubt accomplished that day. And yet, instead of feeling ashamed of his relative indolence, he was relieved.
Wow.
I could say more, but I'm just kind of curious to throw it at you. Like, what was it like to just hear that and take it in?
So much richness. That's just what always strikes me about words.
Well, now that you've heard that paragraph, first off, if you walk onto a train and you see someone sitting
Over there by the window who looks like an immigrant, you might go, I wonder if what's going through his head is that paragraph out of A Little Life. And you've possibly made the inner worlds of other people real to you. Because that's one of the big things that literature does, right? It makes the inner worlds of other people real to you. You learn how to have a voice in your head that's not your voice in your head. That is a big deal because basically all our lives, the only voice that's in our head is our head. But in a way, when you read a text, what you're doing is as much as possible, you're having the writer's voice be in your head, of which then humanizes the people around you and their voices in their heads. And if you don't do that, you can't have empathy, and I would argue you can't even have critical thinking. Because the only way to actually be a critical thinker is to be able to not to put your shoes in another person's shoes, but your feet in another person's shoes, to actually look back on your world from another world. It's not going to do for you simply to critique your worldview. You need to view it from another world, which of course is very, very difficult and perhaps impossible without literature. I love sitting on trains. I love that very scene. I can connect with that very scene. I feel like I'm obviously not an immigrant, but that notion of seeing the reconstitution of people coming. It's also very interesting to see how there's almost a painting, right? When you have the lists of the Czechs and the Tibetans and this kind of list and the colors. This colors is kind of coming in and then going out, coming in and then it's coming out. There's a kind of sense of a kind of fragmentation and yet nevertheless a harmony because all these people have a single unified vision and yet they're incredibly different and they're all bought together in this train, this movement, and yet they're gone. And yet it's constant because it's every weekend, at 11 a.m. there's a kind of clockwork to it. And there's this clockwork of this vast diversity that's moving through, right? So you see in this kind of movement of the many and the one, how you can have many and yet nevertheless have one. And then also what you see is the activities of the protagonist deciding how they accept this reality. Is it totally dehumanizing or is there hope in it? Well, the truth is it's a mixture. This is also one of the great things that literature teaches, is that it's always a frickin' mixture. And without literature, you're going to get black and white, bad versus good. Capitalism is dehumanizing. Well, it's dehumanizing, and then it's a beacon of hope for people who are immigrants from other places. Well, capitalism is both taking advantage of third world nations and the place that people in third world nations want to go into, right? It's always this mixture that is in operation. So you see in the great stories on marriage and romance and et cetera, so forth. I think about the translator of Malicious. Like what you see is it's romance is the most wonderful thing in the world and the most terrible thing in the world because it is only someone you care really deeply about that can utterly destroy you, right? It's a mixture. And you see it's trade-offs. It's all these things at the same time. And you see basically, I think if you don't have a society, I'll stop because I'm going beyond my impressions of the wonderful reading. But basically, that mixture is the only proper orientation from which to think. And the likelihood are philosophers, politicians, theologians, intellectuals, fill in the blank, are going to be thinking from the right posture about the most pressing issues in the world today is incredibly low if they're not reading fiction. They may say it's gray. They may say it's trade-offs. But without fiction, you don't internalize it. You don't feel it, right? You can't help but still have that little feeling in the back of your mind that those other people are wrong, that they're evil, right? It is very, very difficult to have it be a quote-unquote mixture all the way down without the regular practices of fiction. And that is going to have political and civilizational ramifications. I have more to say on some of those things, but I'll just pause for now.
You almost, what I wrote down, you pretty much took the words out of my mouth, but then added much more better words and much deeper than I would have said. But the words I wrote down that bit reconstituting itself every few minutes. Like I thought there was something about reconstitution like that I loved about, because I was thinking too about and I wrote down movement. So those are the two things that really struck me as well, because it really is that kind of painting a picture of that constant movement. It's like the coming together and then the sort of dissolution and the coming together, and how the perception, right, the perception of the narrator is also like just constantly kind of moving around as well. It actually just made me want to read. It was beautiful. It was really nice. What about for you, Seth? What do you love about? What do you love about?
Well, I remembered that piece. I mean, one thing was coming to mind is I used to live in New York and I used to ride the subway. So it also just instantly takes me, you know, I mean, if it had been another passage in the book, I wouldn't have had a personal memory to draw on. But, you know, given that I used to live in New York and ride the subway, it does that for me. It's that particular passage where it describes the reconstituting in terms of the, I've lost the page now, but maybe I'll find it again. But you know, it lists, I think, 4 ethnicities, and then the final ethnicity in the list is always the first one in the next list, which is a clever thing too, so that you see, you know, some of them stayed on the train, some of them got off. But it also, when you read it, it has a musicality to it because the repeated word and the rhythm of it, and yeah, I mean, and I. Yes, the being freed from, is this good or is this bad? You know, you could just be riding a subway. I mean, what it's describing is something that I think people actually universally love, which we tend to call people watching, right? So the author is people watching, and you know, what happens when you people watch? You fall in love, or you get judgmental, or, you know, you remind yourself of your own, you know, problems because all you can see is projections of your own, you know, but whatever. But yeah, there's so much happening when you get invited into someone else's inner world, and then you start to relate, like the artist, you know, this guy's an artist. And actually, when I was living in New York, I was making music. You know, and I would be very aware that like the point of my day is to, you know, make music, which I think is fun. And it looks like those people over there have been doing backbreaking work all day. And I admire them, yet I don't want to go do what they're doing. You know, I mean, it's very relatable, but even the way she writes it, you know, like someone could make a value judgment, like, oh, they work hard and he's this, you know, sort of like, he just messes around and makes art and thinks it's important. But it showed, well, some people are drawn to this rather than that. And even if, you know, some people would judge them, they find that the most authentic thing for them to do is this thing that other people would judge. And it's sort of like, it helps you, yeah, in that way. I mean, yeah, there's a lot in this book. And I even noticed that your question, I mean, I gave you the same question, so it's fair enough. What happened for you? It's actually a difficult question to answer.
It is, yeah.
Right, because it's like, yeah. And this is what I find really interesting in, I mean, I suppose in the practice of what we're doing here, but even in like, you know, like with your intimate partner or something, in a special moment, like, what do you say? Well, you pause a little longer and you begin to speak a little more poetically, or you reach for metaphors or something like that, because you're actually trying to resonate something that you can't quite put into words. And the other thing I can say, since I'm reading the book, and so that's one little piece of it, is it's a slow, like, so I don't know how long it'll take me. It might take me a month to read the book, right? So it's like it's working on me all day long, you know. I mean, some nonfiction is also working on me, like, because certain ideas I'm going out and I'm seeing how to apply them and whatnot. But yeah, it's so I guess that's another thing I'm noticing is like the it's a different tempo. There's that phrase, that famous phrase from Bayo Akomolafe. He says, "The times are urgent, we must slow down," which I always love. But I think it speaks well to this. And yeah, so I'm noticing that the way it slows me down because I become drawn in a certain way. I mean, I can be drawn into a nonfiction book. I can pause while reading nonfiction because I get a bunch of ideas and I really go somewhere. But, when I'm drawn into these characters' lives, it's just like, you almost want to interact in a way sometimes. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a very different quality, isn't it? Being drawn into nonfiction. Yeah.
Right.
It's really important to be able to kind of get what literature is doing and why it's important.
I also say that, I'll wait a moment. Hi, Aspasia.
Hi, welcome back.
Welcome back. Oh, that's where we put our sponsors.
Oh, yeah, that was the ad break. That was the ad break.
Oh, that was the ad
We've got
break.
no
Portion
sponsors.
of the broadcast is brought to you by the map is indestructible.
Yeah, there we go. Da-da-da. Thank you for buying that book, Aspasia. That means a lot. Thank you very much.
One day I'm going to get you to sign it.
Oh my goodness, it will be amazing, and Seth will be here, and we'll be on the porch. It's all gonna work out.
I'll forget it in my suitcase. I'll forget it. I'll travel all
but
that
I'll
way.
sign a piece of paper, and you just tape it into
Paste
it.
it.
It'll work really, really well. No, this so a few things. First, I think generally speaking, most nonfiction today is written assuming you don't read books. And what I mean by that is, therefore, it's kind of, you probably heard, oh, there's one, like a book like Atomic Habits, that might be the only book people have read, right? Because they hear about it and it's supposed to help them with their habits and they want to be productive, right? So most books are written now to be self-contained, right? They assume you haven't read other books. And also they're in the style of kind of basically executive summaries. It's kind of like, what's the main idea, and it's an executive summary. Whereas in, dare I say, a kind of a tradition of literature, if you grant me that, there's this whole giant conversation, and the books will talk about all these different things, and it's basically like, oh, you don't know what we're talking about? That's your problem. Today, readers say, I don't know what you're talking about. It's the writer's fault. Like, if I read a book and I don't know what's going on, that's evidence it's bad writing. In the past, I've been like, that's an evidence that you don't get it. You're not educated. You're not in the conversation, right? Like, if you didn't get it, it was on the reader. So we've switched the burden, right? And that's been a big problem. We also don't believe there's any value in, like, when reading, say, a Dante that's referencing 1,000 different things. We don't see any value in knowing the references or getting the allusions when you read a Finnegan's Wake or a Goethe or a Faust, etc., right? We don't understand the value of being able to kind of participate in that conversation, right? Now, this will get into some things, but the other thing that I would also note, I really did like when Cale said that he made this point the other day as well, on in a lot of like classic texts, the hero has to go speak with the dead. They have to descend into the underworld and speak with the dead to get the wisdom that if they don't have, they won't be able to advance. There's a way in which reading literature and great books is a kind of speaking with the dead. You're going on that mythological journey. And in much great literature, if you don't go on that, you can't succeed, actually. Because the dead, they don't have any skin in the game. So it's not transactional. It's pure wisdom. Like, everything they tell you is just pure wisdom. They have nothing to gain, right? They're out of the race. So there's this idea that when you read a Plato or an Aristotle, well, they have nothing to gain. They're not going to gamify you. They're not trying to sell books, right? They're not in the game. So it's just pure wisdom, and you need to, quote unquote, speak with the dead, right? And there's a way in which you say, oh, so are you saying we need to speak with objectivity? Well, in a way, but the mythological imagination, if you will, classically speaking, they wouldn't perhaps use the language of objectivity. There's an idea that you need to speak with the dead. You need to speak with the saints. That there's a certain wisdom that affords, without which you're in big trouble. But that requires a communion of saints. That requires a great conversation. It's very important to read books that feel like you're in the middle, like you just walked into the middle of a conversation. You just walked into the middle of an unfolding, actually. And I think the reason for that is because that experience is actually closer to Gestalt, as we've talked about, than a self-contained unit. Like, a self-contained unit, it feels like atomic, atomized, separate. When you walk into a great book, dare I say, there's a feeling of being in the middle. Well, yeah, because the Gestalt is always already, right? Like, it's always already. right? So there is something very problematic about self-contained books that kind of metaphysically suggest a atomic world broken down into parts, and it's not gestalts. And this is a problem. Also, it does suggest that the books you should read are the ones that you are interested in. Like Atomic Habits, oh, I'm interested in that, I should read it. Like nonfiction is written with a kind of person in mind. War and Peace does not care if you're interested in it. You're supposed to read it. Like Shakespeare, there's this notion of like, again, like what does it mean to say, well, I'm not interested in Hamlet? Who are you? No one cares if you're interested. You must read it, right? There's this notion as well, like dare I say, the great books, and I do think this is a fair term. There's an idea that it doesn't matter if you're interested in it or not. You like, again, there's a sense in which in classical education, and I'm not trying to raise classical and say it was all right about everything, but I'm just bringing to mind a kind of different spirit that we may have lost, is there's a notion that the great books were the books that if you didn't read, you weren't educated. Like you couldn't be considered an educated person if you had not read these books, right? Because you couldn't participate in the conversation that constituted the polos or the community or the ideas of which made the people who they are, right? And if you're not able to participate in that, you get fragmentation, you get the inability of people to understand what people are talking about. There's no shared conversation. So then there's just interest, there's just personal interest, and now books basically reflect that market. That there's personal interest, and basically people are atomized, and they are just individuals trying to get the head of their own career. The books are not written. I guess this is what I'm saying. You should not be surprised if a loss of fiction and a loss of these more ambitious nonfiction books coincides with a loss of community. Because a book that's making a bunch of illusions is a book saying there's a community out there. Fiction is speaking to other people that you need to be able to feel. It's all communal. It's all speaking to there's a world beyond you. Most of the nonfiction today is interested in your individual optimization, your individual success, and they are written suggesting that you need to know yourself and figure out how to get ahead, right? Books like Hamlet are like, you need to learn everything beyond you. Like your world is this big, really small, and the world out there is real big, and you need to try to go learn that, right? You need to leave yourself more than you need to bring yourself up, right? So that shift has been dire. The other thing I guess I would also say, just as I have too many notes, but I'll say a few more things. The musicality of literature, what's also just very interesting as a very quick note, I think the idea that words are just definitions, which is kind of a theory that words are definitions, fiction makes it very clear that that's ridiculous, that words are not merely definitions. They are participatory experiences. Furthermore, great writing suggests that actually, because great writing becomes musical, you said this, there's some sort of suggestion that if you write well, that words are just as real as the phenomenon themselves, that the music of words is real. There's that idea that the words are just signifiers and they're not the signified, so the signifiers don't exist. Like great writing actually makes things more themselves. Like after you read great writing on a subway, then when you get on the subway, it's more subway. Actually, like the experience of the train is actually enhanced because of the kind of language you've partaken in. When you partake in great language, it makes things more themselves, to which the language was referring. Like once you read Wallace Stevens' The Snowmen, snowmen are more like snowmen. It's like Ascalon talking about, New Jerusalem, Narnia. New Narnia is where blue is more like blue, where clouds are more like clouds. I think that's basically New Jerusalem. Like heaven is when things are more themselves, basically. It's not that they're replaced. It's when everything becomes more fully itself. Great literature is the revelation that a way that you experience things more so themselves is through great language. That language is not getting in the way of things. It is not keeping you from things. It is actually the training of your perceptive capacities to fully experience things. And great writing does that. But here's the issue. It's great writing that does that. Modern nonfiction does not have a vested interest in great writing. It has a vested interest in effective writing. Effective writing, and dare I say lyrical writing or musical writing, are not the same thing. They are different, right? Now, effective writing has a place, but effective writing is not going to unlock your ability to fully experience a tree, right? You need musical writing, the musicality of being. That is what can unlock the tree. So if you don't have people reading fiction, they're probably not experiencing the things around them fully. And that is probably going to make, well, the hyperreal of the screen and the Baudrillard and the attention dopamine all the more difficult to resist. Because if you're not able to make phenomenon outside the digital more alive to you and more musical to you, they will have less ability to draw you in than will the dopamine of the screen, right? So the loss of lyrical language significantly increases the probability that the algorithm bests us. So and I guess I'll say one more thing. There is a lot of talk on this idea now of attention. McGilchrist, everyone's talking about attention. The need to Vivek, everyone's talking about attention. But what is attention? Like, what exactly does attention do? Because you can hear that and you say, so I need focus, right? So you're saying I need the ability to focus. Attention is more like reading than it is focus. Like, and this is the issue. I'm not sure if we can understand what is awareness, as Simone Weil or Ivan Illich or attention or all these people are talking. I'm not sure if we can know what that is unless we read, and we read fiction, actually, like or the great books, because what you're doing in attention when you read, and let me put it this way, because you mentioned it, Aspasia, which blew my mind as a kid. When you read a book, you have something playing in your head. This blew my mind. One day I was reading the Redwall, Martin the Warrior in the bathtub in like 6th grade, and I had this crazy moment where I went, "There's a mouse in my head." It suddenly occurred to me that there's a movie in it. Like, I've done it for years, but now it's like, how is there a movie in my head? How is this happening where I'm reading words on a page and there's a movie on my head? This was kind of when I realized I couldn't ever see my own face. And when I realized that there was a movie in my head, these were the two kind of mind-blowing moments for 8-year-old Dan or a 6-year-old, I don't know. But you see that a moment where you realize, because what you do when you read is you're participating in, right? And as you're participating, you're creating, and you're creating something that's irreducible. You cannot reduce the movie to the words on the paper, but the words on the paper of what are afford the movie, if you will. And the movie is you, and not you, and there's this very complicated metaphysical geometry that's in operation right there. That experience is more of what attention is than focus. Now, it is only possible because of focus. You have to be able to focus on the page to enter into this self-forgetfulness, this kind of self-forgetfulness. But that capacity, that kind of undergoing, is very similar, and I would say gradiently the same, as when you are fully attending to a tree or fully attending to your spouse. There is something alive in your head. You're participating in, you're feeling, you're moving your body, you are coordinating with, because when you read a text, you coordinate successfully to make something appear in your head. You're participating in it, and your attention is not just locking in, but moving with. This is attention. This is awareness. And if you don't engage in reading, I think it will be very difficult. It will not be clear what attention is. And then the weird thing about attention is, to really get it, you have to do it, right? Because you could hear everything I say and say, well, that's kind of weird. Well, no, go read fiction and then you'll get it. Oh, but you have to go read fiction. This is my point. If you have a society of people that are not reading fiction, then when McGilchrist, Illich, and all these people, they are talking about awareness and attention, they will lack the experience by which to kind of know what that means, and they will likely therefore just take attention and awareness in terms of focus or not being distracted. Here's the problem. That's all true, but that's the negative vision. I need the positive vision. What's the positive vision of attention? Like, a lot of the dialogue online about regaining attention is kind of negative, right? It's like, it's bad not to have attention. You're getting sucked in by the algorithm. Well, why not? Why not? Because everything, I enjoy it. People are like, why not? I don't care to have attention. What do I gain by having attention? If I'm watching, yeah, sure, the algorithm's killing my attention, but I'm entertained, aren't I? Now, of course, no one is saying that, but if all you can offer is the negative vision, why not, right? Why not? Other than moralize, because you shouldn't. Well, that never works. You have to give me beauty. If you can. Well, the beauty, attention in the positive vision is afforded by the experience of reading literature. That is getting at attention. And that also is unlocking a way of thinking that is necessary for interpreting well, which if you cannot do, you will struggle in friendship, you will struggle in conversation, you will struggle with people, and you will struggle with the situations that are most human. I'll stop. I had things on the decoding, but I'll stop.
There's sort of like the way I think about it sometimes, it's like there's roads that can lead to almost like touching something more like the divine or something, and it's like this is just so wonderful. There's something too about really getting absorbed in fiction that is also relational, and that speaks to everything you were just saying, which is like sounds weird, but it really is this like speaking to the dead. I love that, because that's another part of when I read, like especially writers who have passed away, and like writers who are drawing from writers before them and all this sort of stuff. I really feel that connection to like ancestry, and there is something timeless about it. There's like and it goes actually to what you were saying before too about Daniel, about something about you walk in the middle of it, right? I thought that was brilliant too, because that's right. It's like a really good fiction. When I'm reading it, when I'm in it, I have this sense that like it was existing before I even started the book. It was, and then when I finish this book, it will continue to exist. Like it will go on. Like it's this.
Yep.
There's something just so magical about it, and for me, reading was always very nourishing and comforting, because I really felt like I was having relationship. Yeah, I don't know. I've got like I feel like I'm bursting with energy, but very few words. So I'm going to put these on, and that might help me too. Yeah,
That definitely helps.
Yeah, that was just all wonderful, Daniel. That's what yeah. I'm so glad we're talking about this. I had no idea we would. Here we are.
It's funny. I had the little thought in my head. Oh, do we need to mention the phrase authentic resonance? Because that's what we are always talking about, is authentic resonance. But actually, I mean, I think what you just said, the experience of like, and you mentioned at the beginning of our conversation, aliveness, there is something that happens that, it just reminds me that I'm alive, right? And, if I stay with it, I might extract from it a intellectual proposition that I could, jot down. But it begins with just like, I'm fascinated. I want to pay attention. I'm drawn in. And so I was also struck by that phrase, that you start in the middle of, and I mean, it's very much like that. The passage from the book I read, the scene starts and you're just suddenly sitting on a train with this guy. The very first scene of the book is two of the main characters are looking at an apartment. And the first paragraph is just a description of like, what they like about it, what they don't like about it. And then it turns out that like the person showing them has just checked their credit and they're not going to be able to get this apartment anyway, and they get kicked out, but you don't have but there's so much there that's the other thing, is there's so much implied, and you're filling in the blanks. And the more you read on the story, you realize, oh, my first guess about the character was a little off, because now I have more context, and the context is just, expanding. But something I wanted to bring in as well is when you said you walk into the middle of the conversation. I mentioned earlier that, a form of social anxiety that I've often had is, oh shit, I don't know what people are talking about. And I would say that these conversations, not just the conversations between the three of us, but the conversations on the liminal web, or what Daniel's always calling the social coordination mechanism, if you wherever you start, I mean, I think I probably started like a lot of people with the Jordan Peterson, and then I found John Vervaeke, and then I found, many other characters from there. But, I'll tune into, I'll now if I'm looking for something to listen to, I might just go to voicecraft, because now I've heard many things on voicecraft, and I might find myself listening to a person who I've never listened to before. I don't know what it's going to be about, right? And then they're dropping references that I don't understand. But there is something about the quality of these conversations that's inviting. And then, I find myself participating. But I wanted to bring these two things together because the other thing that you were speaking to, Daniel, is this sort of historical flip where at one point, there was this assumption that you just do read Shakespeare, right? And at this point, it's like, oh, if you're going to refer to a particular play by Shakespeare, please put in a footnote so that I won't be lost. And I actually relate to that because there's a whole lot of classics that will get mentioned that I haven't read them, And so since it's my little game today, I mentioned I'm reading 4 books. One of the books that I'm reading, which is nonfiction, but I think is a valuable piece in this conversation. I know you guys will know this one. Time, Energy, Why You Have No Time or Energy by David McKerracher. And as I understand it, or it's McKerracher maybe, he's writing a lot of this book, or at least gathering a lot of, the fodder for this book when he's working in an Amazon warehouse and he's listening, to podcasts or maybe books on tape. And there's this section of the book. So he describes time, energy, time, energy as one word. It's not just, it's like if you have free time, but you don't have any energy, what's the value in that? Or if you have a bunch of energy, but no actual time in which to expend it doing the thing you want, so he says you need time energy, which is expendable blocks of free time where you can do the thing that, that you're inspired to do and you're not exhausted when you go to do it. And he has this chapter in here where he's talking about Robin DiAngelo and, this sort of cancel culture. And so he says, so her book is White Fragility, and she talks about, but he says there's something else called time energy fragility. And it's really interesting. And so I read a little paragraph again, but I think it's important because it has to do, and it also has to do with the question you asked, Aspasia, how do we get this to people? Because I think this is a thing, like what I often feel when those classics that I haven't read are being mentioned is, damn it, I really wish I had read them.
Yeah.
Because I would really love to be deeper into the conversation. And I see how everyone, like even Lord of the Rings, I think my father read to me when I was a child, but I just do not remember it. So, I see that.
You don't remember it after it was read to you once? You didn't just store that in there forevermore?
But it is referenced on these podcasts, or even Harry Potter. I haven't read Harry Potter, but this is like the modern day thing. Anyway, this is a little piece from this book. He says, time energy fragility is when a person feels frustration or impatience with the topic being centered because they simply lack the time and energy to adequately research and then participate in the discourse. It's not just about wanting to make sure one says the right thing. Most people have a sense of dignity, which means a resistance towards being told how to see and think of things. We want to be reasoned with, i.e. treated as rational adults who are capable of coming to our own conclusions if we are given the facts. So, I mean, there's a funny halfway thing here. It's not exactly time energy fragility if I haven't read the classics. But then again, living in this culture right now, I may well not, I may well just never been encouraged to do that. I mean, in my case, I can remember I loved reading when I was young, and I think I sort of lost it at a certain point. But so then I go and visit Daniel and Michelle, and like, my guess is you guys have 20,000 books in the house. Maybe that's a little higher, maybe it's a little low, I don't know, but just walls and walls of books. And I know that I'm going to be able to sort of catch up. But it's not so much, I'm not so much having the feeling that he's describing here, where intellectuals talk over people who don't have, a lifestyle that allows them to do that work. I actually feel, so speaking to what you were saying about attention, like that's the positive draw to attention. Wow, what would it be like if I had read all of those books? Mm-hmm. But I think there's something between the negative version and the positive version. There needs to be a bridge that's built. Yes. And, to the degree that there's still all kinds of things I haven't read, like I always like to joke about, I sometimes talk about ideas from Hegel or Nietzsche or Heidegger. I haven't read any of them. I've just listened to a lot of podcasts, but at least I've listened to enough podcasts where I don't feel lost when someone talks about Heidegger. And if they say, that we're the thrownness, I even know what's more or less meant by the throne. We're thrown into this life. It's kind of like being thrown into the middle of that conversation or into the middle of the book. But I think it's and I don't think that what we're participating in here as part of the broader thing that's going on online with Zoom and YouTube, I don't think that was planned. No one said, what we should do, we should talk about the philosophers a lot so that the people who haven't actually read them will start to get an idea. But it's interesting, just in my first person, my own experience, there has been a bridge here where I find myself wanting to read more. And in fact, I said to Daniel at the beginning, thanks, because after listening to you talk about the importance of fiction enough, I finally picked up a fiction book. So I think it's I just want to point to that whole trajectory, because or just one last piece, when I think about the work I do and sometimes marketing it, you could say that what I do is some sort of self-help. That's not really how I would frame it, right? But it's like there are things that I know that could be helpful based on my experience. And one of the ways that I can market it is what they call the pain points. I say, doesn't it suck that you have this problem and this problem and this problem? Well, here, you don't want it to suck anymore, buy my product, right? Or you can sort of speak to the capacities that are, yes. You can speak to the capacities that the person could gain, right? And sort of like express your confidence that you are capable of things that you've never done before. And, that might be more of an inviting way, but, what we tend to do is beat people over the head with what their faults or their inadequacies, which are often like baked into growing up in this culture. Of course you feel inadequate because no one ever showed you how to do this. So yeah, I think I'm sort of just making the point over and over at this point. So I'll stop there.
Yeah, or you could live in Australia and be a psychologist with so much regulation that you're not allowed to say anything at all about what you do. Cool. Just come and see me, maybe. That's it. That's what you're allowed to say. No, I like all that. That's yeah.
So that was all very important.
Not to jump in. So so I'll say there's a few things. So first, before getting on that, which gets into where I think basically the intellectuals or the cultured or the literary, whatever term you want to use, they have not acted ethically and properly by which to inspire the generations to think that this work matters. And I think the social coordination mechanism is having to correct that, or is an alternative toward that. Before saying more about that, one of the reasons why literature is very important, I just want to say this before I forget. Well, first off, both of you have mentioned when you go into literature, you don't know what you're going to get. You don't know what you're going to get out of that. Well, that's one of the most important abilities a human can have, is to be willing to do things not having no idea why you're doing it. Like, why am I reading this fiction? What is it even about? What am I going to get out of it? You have no idea. We've talked many, many times about rational impasses and the need for the non-rational. And if you can't do something non-rational, you're going to inevitably end up in suboptimal results. The very willingness to read something with no idea why, or it's hard to justify, is in of itself a kind of spiritual practice to make you less susceptible to rational impasses. But if people like Atomic Habits, well, I know why I'm reading that, because I want to have small habits that make big differences. And your friends ask, what are you reading? Atomic Habits. Oh, I heard about that book. It's supposed to be really cool. And you get social credit and blah, blah, blah. But when you read Madame Bovary, or you read A Simple Heart by Flaubert or whatever, why are you reading that? Are you an English major? Are you going to be a professor? What reason would you have? I heard it's good. I heard it's important. I heard it's great. Don't know.
But then you get told too that
must be nice to have.
You get told then too, it's written
What's
by
that?
people that are irrelevant now. Like you shouldn't read things by people.
Yeah, they're irrelevant. And also, oh, you have time. Sure would be nice if I had time to read.
Yeah.
I'm busy all the time. You start playing that game, right? Like, so you feel privileged to read. And so then people don't read, and then they're more susceptible to Nash equilibria, blah, blah, blah. Like the ability to do something, not knowing why you're doing it, is the big deal. And also, too, kind of the idea when we said earlier about it doesn't really matter if you're interested in Shakespeare or not. It's Shakespeare, that kind of spirit, right? That also is a certain sort of humbling, putting yourself under the masters, kind of going, even if you read something and say, I don't understand any of it, but it's Shakespeare, that right in of itself is correcting the ego, opening you to the other, making you more communal, making you have a certain sort of respect of things you don't understand. I have no idea what this sentence means, but I'm supposed to honor it, right? All of this are spiritual practices, if you will, that make you less susceptible to Nash equilibria and rational impasses and suboptimal results that are a result of you doing simply what makes sense. Also, I would argue all of that is practices that probably make you more likely to follow and to learn authentic resonance. Because if that authentic resonance is that ability to do that of which cannot be brought into an easily explainable or rational calculus, if you're used to doing that by reading books you don't understand or reading things you can't explain what you got out of them or that you have to reread 5 times, all of that is actually a kind of training of subjectivity to be more able to follow authentic resonance, to make choices as distinct from causes, as Forrest Landry talks about, and we talked about at Voicecraft. Literature helps you with that. And basically a culture that suggests literature is important and it's not obvious why it's important, that is actually the very necessary quality and characteristic of an activity that can train you to not just be mechanically caused, following procedures, and actually is the necessary experience to be free. Because if you can't do that of which is hard to explain, then you're not free. You have to only do that of which can be intelligible. And people like Deleuze warned about that. One of the most important skills also in life, and then is the ability to see multiple things at once. And we alluded to this earlier. Now, this is where it's very important to kind of explain the difference between like the sacramental and the decoding. Because that paragraph you read, Seth, there was no decoding. What are I'm not looking for symbols. What's the hidden meaning that the author put in that paragraph? No, the meaning is the thing. You see it. You see the questions of diversity and home and alienation. You see it all in the image. There's no decoding. There's the ability to see 2 things at once, if you will, right? The ability to, in the description of a subway, to see many things, right? To see in one many, right? One of the most important skills a human has is the ability to see many things in one thing. The ability to see a multiplicity and a singularity and a singularity and a multiplicity, right? There's no decoding. It's the holding of the many and the one together. That's what great literature does. So let's take an example. So when in Greenleaf, the bull, sorry, spoiler alert for great literature from the 50s.
I'll put the banner.
Yeah, spoiler alert. Where we have this
spoiler.
character, the entire time is basically egoic. She's locked in herself and her pride and et cetera, so forth. And something that Flannery O'Connor, and so you have this bull that impales her, basically. And you have these images of the impale, and the horn kind of wraps around the character, kind of pulling her into the horn, right? And you have this image, this one image. So Flannery O'Connor is very interested in when the only way for grace to reach someone is through violence. Like, because there's this idea in Christianity that grace has to be loving and kind. And Flannery O'Connor is like, well, no, if you have someone that's actually all enclosed in themselves, it has to pierce them. It has to be violent, right? So you have this sort of image of grace as violence in this bull impaling through the character, right? This is not decoded. The entire story has been showing how people enclose themselves and people try to reach them with charity, but they can't be reached at, where then in the end it has to be violence. But then what is violence if it's actually an act of grace to wake people up, right? So in this image, you can see an explosion of theological consideration. You can see an explosion of ideas. And also the description of the bull is basically like Zeus coming across, right? So there's this notion that pagan gods can potentially be participating in the work of grace, right? That all of these things, but the Zeus is in the description of the bull. And the hug of the horns is the grace. There is no symbol you see when you are reading about the bull impaling the character, you see grace acting at the same time. There's no decoding, there's no mystery. The story has worked in such a point where exactly what Flannery O'Connor is asking is clear as day in the image, right? And it's not there at all. There's not a word about grace. There's no sort of talk of Christian theology in the story. It's a story about a bull and a character trying to get him in the field. It has nothing to do with theology, and every single scene had everything to do with this theological question and the stakes of the modern world, right? There's no decoding. The way to look at it, I like how Jack Mills describes like a part of the Bible. It says, imagine a man whose entire, he says the New Testament is like a man whose arm is entirely covered with tattoos of the Torah. Everywhere it moves, it brings all the images with it, right? Like it brings all of the images with it, right? So it is in great literature. All the images and the meaning is being carried with it all at the same time. There is no decoding. There is this revelation that strikes all at once, right? So you learn, so great literature teaches you to see this weird thing that the human can do, seeing multiple things at the same time, and yet not seeing multiple things at the same time. It's almost like when you're reading in a bathtub as an 8-year-old, black marks on a piece of paper, and you have a mouse in your head. There's no mouse in your head. You're not seeing a mouse in your head. You're seeing black marks on a piece of paper, and yet you are at the same time. That ability, I personally put a lot of weight on as being like a critical, like one of the critical, if not the most human capacity, is this ability to have an experience of many things at the same time, and yet they're not there and there at the same time. This radical bothness all throughout the entire stack. And for me, the conversation about defending attention is defending that experience and that kind of thinking and emoting. Also, these experiences are not simply reducible to emotion or to thinking or to mind or to body. There's a wholeness that's there all at once, right? And this is what literature does. Now, obviously, not all literature. I would argue, unfortunately, literary fiction, especially in modern terms, move more in the direction of personal expression and confession as opposed to the construction of a story that's doing something like Greenleaf. And one of the things Michelle and I do with like Under the Wing is basically we believe that fiction has not been, how do I say this, has not been realized in the proper way that it should be realized. But of course, literary fiction as being playing catch up to a society that's thrown it aside in favor of nonfiction, so it's tried to conform itself, and in that very conformity lost its soul. And the lack of, and a failure to recover that can be very consequential. Now, obviously, I'm not saying everyone, but there is an art form here that has to be honored and recovered.
I also have a copy of that somewhere. I'm looking for it, Under the Wing. I was gonna do.
Oh my goodness!
But maybe later I can I'll just do like a shot of me much later on, obviously holding it up.
You are amazing. It means a lot. So that ability, I want to say things also on the time entered what you were saying with Dave, and because this is important. But I'll just stop with that with the Greenleaf for now on this idea of the seeing of the multiple and how that is really kind of the height of thinking. Like that experience of the mouse in the head as you're reading, that seeing of the bull, like that multiplicity at once is kind of the height of thinking. And I really do think a lack of that kind of experience, which fiction affords, is going to weaken your ability for things like authentic resonance and your ability for choice and courage and being able to do something you can't explain. Like if you are not having those experiences, then you're atrophying your muscle for that kind of thing. I can say more on that, but I'll pause for now.
There's something very sensory and multi-sensory about all this as well. Like it's because it is that. Like as I've said, I remember that the vividness of the imagery and everything that would appear as I'm just reading when I was very young was just so so exciting to me. But then it's also another kind of version of this that I've never really been able to put into words properly is, and I've talked about it before, is my relationship to poetry, like reading poetry. Like when I was super young, and I would pull these books out of this bookshelf we had, right, of poetry. And honestly, so much of it, I didn't even know what 90% of the words meant. But I loved just reading it. It's just such a strange thing. It felt there was like I would just read it and it's the sound. It was the sound. There's something about the sound and like the music, I guess, as we're saying. And even now when I read poetry, sometimes I'm almost like sort of like humming as I read it. And sometimes I'm like there's this all this other stuff going on. And when I was really young and not understanding many of the words didn't even matter. It gave me this experience. It was weird. It was like a familiarity or like a remembering or like a, I guess it's like resonance. It felt familiar to me, something about it. And it was to do with, and it's sensory. And then I've always had this thing too, where like I have this really intense sense of smell. Like smells are very alive to me. And then sometimes like I would smell things as I'm reading poetry. Sometimes I can taste things. Like there's this real sensory thing that goes on. And I mean, this happens in therapy too, right? Like it is really multi-sensory for me. And there's sensations in the body, and there's this like little like tingling thing that happens in my back. Which to me seems like it's correlated with all this. There's something going on there about what's happening in the room, but which I won't get into. All of these things too. I don't know if it's like this for everyone, but they wake you up. Like they wake you up. They help you to remember all of what it is to be human. And that's very, very different. Again, not taking away from it, but it's very, very different from putting on a movie, right? Like, I mean, I love a good movie, don't get me wrong, but like, and I watch a lot of them, but it's, yeah, that's just, and there is something about the magic of that, for lack of a better term, or maybe actually it's more like the sacredness of that. It's like, how on earth could some, I don't know, guy like 70 years ago write these words down, and then like I find them as a 5-year-old and I'm reading them, and it's just like all this, I don't know, and it was completely, I think there's a relief to it or something, because it was completely different to then going into normal life. But it wasn't like an escapism. It was just like I don't know. This is why I find it also mysterious. So I think poetry is the prime example of that for me as well. Like there is something about poetry that when I talk to people about liking to read poetry, I think often people are assuming that, well, I must be like reading it technically, and like, and that's what it is to read poetry. That's one way you can go about it, and there are elements of that are fun, but that's not at all what's happening when I read poetry.
Well, if you want, before we end, I'll read a poem that I
Please,
not my
poem,
but there's a poem that I was speaking with someone in the cafe today, and it came up, and it's like the poem that I was supposed to read in high school because it was assigned to me, and I haven't read poetry all the time since, but I never forget this poem. I keep going back to it. But first of all, I wanted to say I would love to hear, Daniel, your further thoughts on time, energy, and this question of part of what I was interested in is like, how do we bridge the gap between the person who's read Shakespeare and the person who hasn't but would have loved to if they'd only been given the and it's going to be little by little. But you also said something there. Well, first, before I go there, what you were just saying, Aspasia, about your experience of reading poetry, it also takes me back again to, you used many words, but one of the words that we used before that might encapsulate them was aliveness. Mm. And again, it's a little too simple, but if we talk about nonfiction versus fiction, it would seem to me that nonfiction I read because I want to know something.
Yeah.
And fiction I read because I want to have an experience of not knowing.
Yes.
And it's that experience of not knowing that brings the aliveness. And, I think is a key piece of authentic resonance is like, we of course want to learn and digest what we've learned to the point where it becomes like a felt knowing, like I just know how to ride a bike. And so, I just get on the bike. But then when I get on the bike, I have the experience of the winds or, oh my God, here comes a car. I gotta look out for, don't kill myself while I'm biking around. It's the aliveness always relates to the part that's beyond my control. And so, I'm just struck how literature like takes me in to that place. But so what I wanted to say, and this is also, I'm very happy today how, the different pieces that felt random are all starting to point at each other, which is interesting as well to just imagine again, like what are we doing here? We're just saying what we were thinking about, and then we didn't know we would end up here, but it has more and more coherence as we go along. I mentioned with this book, that I had been thinking for some time that I really should read some fiction. Well, why this one? I mentioned that my daughter wanted to read the book, and then, it also comes with it's a National Book Award finalist. Oh, okay, so this isn't just any book. A lot of people are saying it's a good one. And then I sort of read the description and get pulled in. But the thing that really struck me too was, what if my daughter reads it and I read it? Yeah. Think about all the conversations we could have, and think about the depth that we could, she's about to turn 17. So,
how lovely.
We talk about in depth, we sometimes talk about politics, or we sometimes talk about some of the ideas that we might talk about here. But if we've both just had this relationship with all these characters that goes on for several hundred pages, and, I'm reading ahead, so I have to make sure I don't spoil anything for her. But, that's what really drew me into this book. It sort of just landed on me because it's Christmas and she mentioned that for her Christmas list. But I thought, wow, this just appears to be a potential way of crossing that intergenerational divide that I often don't know how to cross. And I think that's, that's a really important piece that is part of what's needed now as well, because of course, who has the knowledge that the younger generation doesn't have? Well, it's the older generation. And who has the understanding of the way the world works now that the older generation doesn't have? It's the young people. So we need to be talking. So anyway, that's just a personal anecdote, but I think it fits nicely into some of the other themes. So I wanted to mention that aspect of why I picked up the book. And I'll save the poem, but I think it's a poem that's sort of about the role of the artist. So I think it also seems to nicely fit into the cracks of what we've been talking. But I'd love to hear what you had to say, Daniel.
As a few things. So first, what you just said is extremely important. It is, when you lose literature, the canon, whatever you want to talk about, you don't be surprised if you have disconnect between generations. Because when you have because everyone's going to be isolated in their own content of preference or what they like and what they watch. But if there is books like, no, you have to read this to be educated, then there's a way in which that can help cross generations and divides, right? Because your grandmother, your grandfather, your father, everyone has read Hamlet. And that then becomes a common, because here's the other key. We now have a common metaphor or analogical basis of reasoning by which to understand our situation in our lives. So actually it becomes more likely that we can share intelligibility because we have similar reference points, stories, so on and so forth. Like, this is one of the things that religions say, if everyone's read the Bible, this did. There's a common cultural reference points that will, metaphorically, intellectually structure thinking in very critical ways. So, that's a very important thing. I think also too, I will also just say one thing on this question. So, well, a few things. On this question of how to make literature compelling and how to cross the gap, etc. Well, first off, the average person, it has not been articulated to them why they should put in the energy. They have limited energy. They have limited time. It is not clear to them why they should care, right? Um, well, one of the things for me that, great work makes you realize, you go, oh my gosh, I don't know how to experience anything. Like, I've not experienced things. Wow, I don't actually know how to feel things. Wow, I don't know how to think. Like, one of the things when you encounter great work is that you're like, wow, there's a possibility of a fullness of experience I don't have, or have tasted, or feelings, right? So first off, we have a world where people don't even believe in qualitative or qualia experience. So the vision of being able to more so experience and have deeper qualitative experience is what these things afford, that you have to get people to believe is even possible, right? So how do you make people believe these things are possible? How do you kind of show them, right? Um, well, one of the things we're doing on the social coordination mechanism is modeling it, because also you've pointed to something, is that it is much more likely you're going to be reading Melville and Sophocles, etc., if there are people around you who you can talk about it with, and there is conversation of which you can incorporate it with. And if that goes away, and what everyone around you is talking about is Game of Thrones, well, then you're going to go watch Game of Thrones to share in that conversation, aren't you? Because it's communal, right? It is very difficult to do these great works if there's no communal possibility. And something that gives me hope is that this new technology, the social coordination mechanism, is now more so regaining the communal possibility of this work that I would unfortunately say the universities have failed in. Because there's one of the things that has contributed to this problem is because I would like to say that basically I'll just say literary, because the word literary didn't just mean literature, it could mean philosophy, the literary. We have not had a robust sense of the ethics of the literary, meaning what is the ethical way that the literary person should act, or you could say intellectual as well. Basically, most people have experienced intellectual discussion as something that makes me feel stupid and left out, and I don't know the references. And when I went to school and the professor talked about Hegel, they made me feel as if my interpretation was wrong, their interpretation was right, and that there is, that interpretation is, we can't get out of interpretation, but the professor knows what's best, so it's really confusing. I don't really get it. You say that you want me to think for myself, but then when I do, I'm wrong, and I don't know all the references. So the intellectual space is the space of contradiction, putting down status, and other things that people don't want anything to do with, right? I would all say this is because intellectuals, the literary, have not, they've not been ethical. They've not done their duty, if you will. They've not done what they are supposed to do. And therefore, it makes sense that people would not say there's any value in this. Furthermore, I believe that basically literature has not been taught very well, because literature has been taught basically who are the main characters, what are the ideas, what is the plot, here's your test, did you get all the right answers or not? Oh, you didn't? I guess you didn't read it properly, and it's a trivia game. All of these things have been used in service of trivia. So why in the world would it would seem as if the whole point of the humanities is to gain cocktail knowledge, as Tim once put it. So at cocktail parties, I can tell you what I've read and I can show off peacock feathers or stuff like that, right? So what in the world? I'm humble. Like, there's a sense in, like, you guys are talking about Shakespeare. Well, you're real prideful. I'm humble. I don't read that kind of things because I don't need to impress people, right? That's kind of people's knee jerk, right? So that's no good, right? And it's even more reasonable for people to make those conclusions if indeed there is a certain time energy restraint, as Dave talks about. And there's also a certain fragility that people have, where the moment I say Shakespeare, that just makes, I don't like hearing things I don't understand, and there's a kind of blow up, right? So there's a question of what is the right way to act if you're going to talk about literature and intellectualism and different things like that, right? That is aware of this fragility, but also is aware that it really does matter if people are inspired into this way of life, because there are real consequences if you're not. You're probably going to be atomized. You're probably going to be missing out on qualitative experiences. You're not going to have that fullness of thought that we have been pointing to that literature can open you up to. And you are going to probably form habits in the direction of autonomous rationality, quantification at the expense of qualification. Like it really will impact your life, right? Well, then you need to, there are actually just like a bunch of like practical things that it comes down to, right? When you talk with someone, don't make them feel as if they need to have read everything. Two, it doesn't matter what you've read if it's a gestalt, because everything contains the whole, actually, right? Three, the point, Hegel did not write his book so that people could get so that people would write PhDs about him. He wrote them because he thought it was important and was trying to get people alive on the spirit of his idea so that people could participate in the unfolding. So when you talk about Hegel, are you doing that? Are you inspiring people to follow the idea and unfold with it? Four, are you in your speech are you trying to find an articulation that is more inviting than it is keeping people out? When you talk about, difficult things, yes, there is going to be tough language and there is going to be terms you don't know. But do you try your best to not have those terms keep people out, right? Do you try your best to define the terms as you're speaking, and you're trying to when you speak, are you trying to bring people in or are you trying to keep them out? When you talk about Flannery O'Connor, do you talk about Flannery O'Connor in a manner that makes people feel like, man, I haven't read as much as that person, or to actually describe the movement of grace so that people can actually understand maybe in their own life how grace operates, because they're kind of tormented and not sure how to understand the bad things that are happening, and they thought God loved them, and now it doesn't seem like he is. Well, maybe actually some of this is trying to break through and be a way grace receives you. So the way you just described Flannery O'Connor could actually help me deal with some of the tensions in my life, right? Like, are those the ways that one is describing these things, right? There's an ethic, if you will. There is a right way to present the life of the mind, the great books, et cetera, so forth, to people. And I don't think, in general, intellectuals have done it. I don't think they've been doing it. I think the university in general fell into status games, and it fell into professionalism. And it actually kind of wanted to keep out the conversation of the creative possibilities that could unfold from the great discussion for the authoritative reading that the experts had. Because I think also, honestly, many of the humanities professors in most of the universities themselves have been nervous about the value of their own activity. And they themselves have not known why it is important. So they have justified it by saying, I have the correct and best interpretation of Chaucer. I am the authority on Milton. I am the authority on Dante. The reason why this matters is because I'm the world expert on them. Well, that's all wonderful. And being a world expert on something is not easy, but that is not why literature matters. Literature is much vaster than the information of Milton, and Milton himself only created the information you care to specialize in because he was taken by a vision of something that he believed articulating was important for the human condition. And so I do think most teachers of the humanities themselves don't fully believe that the humanities are necessary for being human. They see it as a specialized knowledge of a careerism. That's basically most of them, in my experience, when I asked various professors of literature, they said the point of literature is pleasure. It is not false that pleasure matters. There is no way Dostoevsky is about pleasure. There is no way that literature is simply about enjoyment. It is about a certain elevation that by undergoing, you can participate in a higher form of life that entails higher highs and lower lows, because it turns out the only way to undergo new creation is to descend into hell. But that, as we see in Dante, is also the road to the Paradiso. So it's not merely about pleasure, it's about the commedia. It's about the entire journey that is through the full mixture of all of the dimensionality and emotions of the human condition that all must be felt in full and wrestled with so that you can be fully alive. So literature is not merely about pleasure, even if on the other side of its crucible there is joy. It is about a giving yourself over to something and you don't know where it's going to go. And it just turns out that being human requires the willingness to do something that you don't know where it's going to end up. And literature is an invitation into that. And I do unfortunately believe most professors do not believe that. And so in not believing that, Then, of course, when they encounter the time energy fragile individuals, they're not able to give a compelling vision. And then, of course, to complete the damnation, when the average person has no interest in Shakespeare, they say, I knew you were stupid. I knew that you should have that blue collar job and I should be in the university because you don't appreciate it. And that just proves that the system has rightly organized people in the places that they're supposed to go. And this, of course, is the language of a demon. But it is the kind of speech that one tends to say to themselves as a rationalization of their inability to inspire people into the good life that they themselves have lost the ability to articulate and to know. But I do believe this work actually does invite people into a beauty that can be known no other way. And I actually think that many people who don't think there's any value in reading Shakespeare or Flannery O'Connor or Dante, or one can go on, in my experience, I've never met anyone that when these things are articulated properly or presented properly, their eyebrows don't go up or their interest is not perked. I've never met that person. I've met them say, I don't know when I'll get to it, but it is a very, very different thing when somebody says, man, I don't know when I'd get to it versus I don't see the point. I think the first move is we get the average person to stop saying, I don't see the point to, man, I wish I had time. That's actually a universal shift.
Yeah.
That is a cosmic shift. Most people say, I don't see the point. If we can start actually modeling and presenting a way of life that makes people say, I want the time to, that's a massive shift. And that could lead to political ramifications, because if people want the time to, they may vote for the time to, and they may look to the work conditions to do these sort of things. But unfortunately, at this point, I think most people don't say that. They say, what's the point? I don't see why to do those things. So I would say our work now, as the first step, at least to the degree we can on this social coordination mechanism, is to make the average person move from looking at literature and saying, I don't see the point, to instead saying, man, I wish I had time to. Because if that shift can occur, then I think we've gone a long way.
I think too, really fascinating poem time, Seth. There's something too like about that sort of like the point of literature that also links to the Flannery O'Connor thing around the grace and violence. Because, you know, like
Yes.
reading a lot of literature can be like a violence, you know, like it really pierces us, and the grace in that. I mean, for me, that is part of why I'm so willing to go into like the shadowy places and be confronted by things there, because of that, which is, yeah, I love Flannery O'Connor. I actually learned about Flannery O'Connor from hearing you mention her at some point, Daniel. So there you go. So,
Magnificent.
yeah, Seth, take it away. Take us out
All
with
right.
our Christmas carol in the poem.
Well, I just want to say, I think that what you were just speaking to, Daniel, is an aspect of what is often labeled as the problem of political polarization, which isn't addressed, because it's also how the two sides feel they are spoken to by the other. It's not just the difference in the opinions. So I love what you were speaking to, even with your numeric points there, you know, like we can say the same thing, but we can say it in different ways. And that's a really important thing for us to understand when speaking the cross difference. Anyway, that we could do another whole discussion on that. But here we go with, if for the two of you, or for the video caption, I'll share where I'm reading from. You can choose if you want to follow along or not. But this is The Man Moth by Elizabeth Bishop. And the note at the beginning of the poem says, Man Moth is a newspaper misprint for mammoth. So I guess that's what inspired her to write the poem. Here above, cracks in the building are filled with battered moonlight. The whole shadow of man is only as big as his hat. It lies at his feet like a circle for a doll to stand on. And he makes an inverted pin, the point magnetized to the moon. He does not see the moon. He observes only her vast properties, feeling the queer light on his hands, neither warm nor cold, of a temperature impossible to record in thermometers. But when the man Moth pays his rare, although occasional, visits to the surface, the moon looks rather different to him. He emerges from an opening under the edge of one of the sidewalks and nervously begins to scale the faces of the buildings. He thinks the moon is a small hole at the top of the sky, proving the sky quite useless for protection. He trembles, but must investigate as high as he can climb. Up the facades, his shadow dragging like a photographer's cloth behind him, he climbs fearfully, thinking that this time he will manage to push his small head through that round, clean opening and be forced through as from a tube in black scrolls on the light. Man standing below him has no such illusions. But what the man Moth fears most, he must do, although he fails, of course, and falls back, scared, but quite unhurt. Then he returns to the pale subways of cement he calls his home. He flits, he flutters, and cannot get aboard the silent trains fast enough to suit him. The doors close swiftly. The man Moth always seats himself, facing the wrong way, and the train starts at once at its full, terrible speed, without a shift in gears or a gradation of any sort. He cannot tell the rate at which he travels backwards. Each night he must be carried through artificial tunnels and dream recurrent dreams. Just as the ties recur beneath this train, these underlie his rushing brain. He does not dare look out the window. For the third rail, the unbroken draught of poison runs there beside him. He regards it as a disease he has inherited the susceptibility to. He has to keep his hands in his pockets, as others must wear mufflers. If you catch him, hold up a flashlight to his eye. It's all dark pupil, an entire night itself, whose haired horizon tightens as he stares back and closes up the eye. Then from the lids, one tear, his only possession, like the bee's sting, slips. Slyly, he palms it, and if you're not paying attention, he'll swallow it. However, if you watch, he'll hand it over, cool as from underground springs and pure enough to drink.
Wow.
Yeah, that's the one poem I remember from high school English class.
Here you are reciting it in this moment. Wow.
Well, yeah, reading it. Don't have it memorized, but that would probably be a good project as well.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas. Thank you for the tear.
Yeah.
Drank it up.
Oh, I love that. That's probably a lovely place to end it, I would say.
I basically want to go to war with every literary department in this country, like in this world, because literature has been so poorly, it's been so poorly taught. The whole education crisis, the meaning crisis, all this stuff, I know it is tied, in my opinion, to basically an educational collapse of being able to justify or explain the value of the humanities. Like, if you cannot justify these things, then basically you're going to have people who are weak training those faculties of the mind that align with Gestalt, that align with the authentic resonance, that align with choice distinct from causation, like all of the now, I don't blame, I understand the difficulty of justifying the humanities because it is weird to explain. But basically, the humanities gave up trying to justify them. The last fighter for it was like basically Harold Bloom. But he himself also, I fear, basically got angry, just got tired and started, unfortunately, using the power game theory moves in conversation to justify his defense of literature that will not work, because you're just going to basically get people on your side who agree with you. Now, I think Cushman, I think Brooks, I can start Woods. There are other literary critics that do a better job, but the key move, in my opinion, and I'll stop, but again, the key move is understanding that reading is attention. Like, when these people are talking about attention, awareness, we need to regain attention in the attentionless economy. The computers are taking our attention. Attention is reading. It is not merely focus.
Yeah.
Like, you're always reading. Like, in a way, if this bookcase is atoms or whatever, I read bookcase. Like, all experience is reading, actually. And so what fiction does is it trains you to be metaphysical ultimately. Like, because you're seeing something there, not there at the same time. Like, metaphysics is there in the physics and not there at the same time. Lack. There's a mouse in your head. The movie in your head playing as you read is lacking, right? It's not nothing, as Jock and I talk about all the time. So reading is basically metaphysical attunement. When you are reading fiction and you are reading books, you have to attune. It's training metaphysics. And it's not by chance that the loss of humanities equals the loss of metaphysics, because you lose the faculty to even think the topic. So of course you don't think it teaches anything, because you can't think the topic. But that's just because you don't meet the conditions of thinking the topic, not because the topic doesn't exist, but because you have failed to meet the condition by which the topic is relevant. And so
I'm really sorry, I have to go.
yeah, I do too. I'm actually
so
looking
sorry,
at the
I've been
time.
holding on.
You
I
are
want to hear.
fantastic. No, you are great.
Can
Thank
you
all.
finish the
Can I
sentence
speak?
though? Well,
No. What's that, my dear?
Well, can you finish the sentence somewhat succinctly? Probably not.
We can't defend.
Probably not.
You can't defend attention unless you have a robust defense of fiction.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that's ultimately what it
Yeah,
comes
I
down
think
to.
you
Dr.
do a
Pepper.
great job. I was thinking of the Robin Williams character in Dead Poets Society. I think you just have to, it's partly showing that you freaking love it,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know,
That's a huge.
Shine.
people in.
It's the shine. Yeah.
Yes. Yes, it is.
Sorry to end it so abruptly.
No, you're
No
right.
problem.
You're awesome. I'm gonna need 5 of these.
All
Y'all
right.
have a good one.
Take care.
Let's do now.
Bye.
My eye isn't functioning. I'm going to try to persevere with this heavy ornament on my ear in the name of the spirit of Christmas. So that's what's Aspasia was way smarter. She just put on red and has Christmas things in the background.
I have completely
have
sensible Christmas items. Yes.
I put an ornament on my ear
I'm an
because I
atheist,
thought
so.
no, actually
Chris just
that's
has
what
a
all
skeleton.
that's
It's just
what
a
all
bear
of-
skeleton in the background.
That's no. He looks so much like he just got out of the workshop. He's clearly an elf.
You do.
That he's been working.
I do have these I was going to put on.
Oh, that works out.
Oh, that's a green
Oh,
water bottle, Seth. You are Christmassy after all. Look.
This ornament hurts so bad. Oh, it hurts so.
You've got
Oh,
to
it hurts.
swap it around. See what it's like to be a woman who's always got things hanging.
That's
from
what
her
you know.
ears.
I actually almost said that.
These
but,
little guys
yeah, if I-
behind me are actually little kiwis. You can't see them. They're little kiwis with little Santa hats on.
Are they now?
Or what do you guys call them? Kiwi birds, don't you? You call kiwis the fruit.
I call them fruit. Apparently,
So,
they have
do you know what a
names.
kiwi bird is? A little flightless
Sure.
bird. Yeah, that's what those are. We call
They're
them
green.
kiwi.
Are they green?
No, they're
Oh, he's
not
trying
green.
his
No,
mic.
no,
I
that's a
think he's
kiwi
trying his mic.
fruit. You Americans. So
Yeah, we suck.
we call kiwi fruit, and then the
Okay.
bird we call kiwi.
You know, I could hang it here, couldn't I? Wouldn't that be
Yeah.
smarter? Oh no, it's stuck. It's stuck on the thread thing. Okay.
How's this?
Oh, you can ring. It can be the Barb Marley. That's when Barb Marley
Oh.
comes and
Christmas
saves
spirit,
Scrooge.
here we are. Look at that. And look at that joyous smile.
Oh my goodness, Scrooge is saved. We just watched the Muppet Christmas because that's the best one by far.
That's the end of the conversation today. We saved
yeah, that
Christmas.
was
We
it.
got
Great.
Seth.
See, Merry Christmas, everyone.
Oh, did you put it away?
Joy
Did you
to the
put it
world.
away? Oh, you've still got it.
No, this guy's still got it. He's all over it. I'm gonna break this ornament. It's a Dr. Pepper candy cane. It's pretty amazing. Yeah, actually, the kids ate it up. When you're in Virginia, get a few things right. Dr. Pepper candy canes are one of our signatures.
And the name for the talk, Fierce Psychic Legs. I like that.
Your psychic legs. Oh my
In
gosh,
caps.
That is
And
that
fierce is spelled incorrectly. It's, you know, the I and the E around the wrong way. So we'll do that too.
it was spelled incorrectly to be correct as the title.
Because it's fierce. That's why it doesn't care about the rules.
No, absolutely not. That's poetry. The meaning and the form are the same. So the fear.
Model that she drew.
Oh, Grace's favorite animal is axolotl. Grace
Well, there
will
you
be
go. Those
thrilled.
two would get along very well. And then drew a dragon, and he put some post-it notes explaining it. I don't know if you can.
That is a cool dragon.
It is, but the things he
Wow.
wrote, I love what he wrote. He's very poetic. So he's put fierce psychic legs, red hot wings, invisible
Tasty.
patterns in the dark gloomy sky, scratched scar, rainbow crystal talk,
Nice.
vast flames, and fierce golden eyes. So
Well, Poseidon, you knocked it out the water, buddy.
What
That
more
is
do we need?
fantastic. Oh,
Yeah.
that's what Christmas is all about, right there. Oh my
Merry
goodness. I discovered Dr. Pepper candy canes, and there's something. The kids don't know, they're not getting all of them. They think they are.
I feel like we've gone from like epic poem shared by Seth, sharing of, you know, tears, to kind of, you know, some axolotls.
Yeah,
now-
absolutely.
Hey, it's intergenerational communication, right?
That's
You
right.
know,
The fabric. That's it.
this is how we braid
It's
together
all- It's all
generations.
one. It's all good stuff.